Hello, welcome to video 2i, more about properties of limits. This can be a very quick video. We just want to go back, make sure everyone's okay about applying the properties of limits. Here's the type of problem we could ask. So suppose that we know three things about functions f, g, and h. We know that the limit as x approaches 2 of f is 6. We know the limit as x approaches 2 of g is -4. And the limit as x approaches 2 of h is 0. So the only thing we know about these functions are their limit as x approaches 2. And we want to see if we can evaluate the following quantities. Okay, the first one says the limit as x approaches 2 of f of x. Well, these kind of make sense. They're kind of common sense here. If x approaches 2, we know that f of x is approaching 6. So this is approaching 6, and 3 times 6 would be 18. So if f is approaching 6, 3f would be approaching 18. Okay, now limit of x approaches 2 of the sum of these functions. Well, f is approaching 6, that's its limit. G is approaching -4, that's its limit. So really, to find this limit, we just have to add the limits of f and g. 6 plus -4 is 2. Okay, so if we have the limit of a sum of functions, we just add their limits. Same thing with difference. As x approaches 2, f is approaching 6, g is approaching -4, so their difference is approaching 6 minus a -4. So if we have the difference of two functions, we just subtract their limits. 6 minus a -4 is +10. Okay, we can get a little bit fancy here. We want the limit of 2 times f of x plus 3 times g of x as x approaches 2. Well, this would be 2 times 6, and this would be 3 times -4. So this first part is approaching 12, and the second part is approaching -12. So I guess together, when we add that up, the whole thing is approaching 0. So as x approaches 2, this whole thing on the inside must be approaching 0. We can play the same game with multiplication. The limit of x approaches 2 of f of x times g of x. Well, f is approaching 6, g is approaching -4, so their product must be approaching 6 times -4, which is -24. So if we have the limit of a product, we can just multiply their limits. All right, quotients are fine. We just got to be careful that the denominator is not going to 0. So as x approaches 2, g of x is approaching -4, which is fine. And f of x is approaching 6. So this limit of f divided by g is approaching 6 over -4, which is actually equal to -3/2. All right, x approaches 2. In the numerator, we have the sum. We have 6 plus -4. But the denominator is approaching 0. So, that doesn't exist. So the numerator is approaching a fixed number. The denominator is approaching 0. That is a case of does not exist. It's approaching infinity or -infinity. All right, there we go. Now, I told you this would be quick. There's only one other thing I want to talk about. And it's kind of common sense also. The limit of composition of functions. Okay, so we have two functions. F of x equals x squared minus 20. And g of x is the absolute value of 5 minus x. So we want to find the limit as x approaches 4 of f of g of x. Well, just like we're evaluating it, we work from the inside out. So we know x is approaching 4. We know g of x, if we plug it into the function, is approaching 5 minus 4, which is 1. Okay, so this whole argument inside here is approaching 1. We got to stick 1 into f. If we stick 1 into f, we get that f of g of x is approaching f of 1, which is 1 squared minus 20 is -19. Okay, so x is approaching 4, g of x approaching 1, so f of g of x is approaching f of 1, which is -19. All right, let's try this. X approaches 7. So I'll go over here. X is approaching 7. So the inside g of x is approaching g of 7, which is the absolute value of 5 minus 7, which is absolute value of negative 2, which is 2. So this part right here is approaching 2. So the whole limit's approaching f of 2, which would be, well, let's see, f of g of x is approaching f of 2, which would be 2 squared minus 20, which is negative 16. Okay, so we kind of have to, like I say, work from the inside out. X approaching 7, g of x is approaching 2. Then if the argument of f is approaching 2, then its value is approaching 2 squared minus 20, which is negative 16. Alright, this one just has them backwards. No big deal. X is approaching 6. So let's kind of think from inside out. So x is approaching 6. So this part, f of x, must be approaching f of 6, which is 6 squared minus 20, which is positive 16. It's 36 minus 20. So this number in here, this quantity inside here is approaching 16. So the whole limit is approaching g of 16. So g of f of x is approaching g of 16, which would be absolute value of 5 minus 16, absolute value of negative 11, which is 11. Pretty much, you just have to figure out what the value of the inside function is and substitute that into the outside function. Okay, here we go. I told you this would be quick. So here we have one of these problems. We know the limits of, as x approaches 10, of f, g, and h. Find the following quantities and write them in your journal. See you later.